Well, it's 2025, and yet another Pocket Monster game has made its debut. While seemingly positively anticipated by a lot of people in its lead up to release, there is a ton of negativity around the game, and a lot of it I actually happen to agree with. However, controversially, this is my favorite Pokemon game so far. So, in this ramble, I will talk to why the game speaks to me as a subjective individual, as well as the fundamental problems that seem to plague the Pokemon franchise as a whole. First, it is a bit important to establish where I'm coming from as a point of view for this ramble. I have only played these games on the screen, and I have mixed opinions about them all, but we don't have time for that. I don't have an extensive history with the video game part of the franchise, but more with the story, cards, all that. Anyhow, like a lot of people, Legends ZA achieves notoriety to me in the more dynamic and fresh battle system. Whilst the turn system evolved is iconic and very well fleshed out after almost 30 years of implementation, battles feel so much more alive in a real-time setting, for me personally. It doesn't take away from the core aspect of the game franchise, but renews it. I think it helps I'm not as attached as others might be with my more limited history to the games. Also, with the news of Pokemon Champions, where the traditional systems will be nicely held, is great for the evolution of this franchise, because the traditional system works well for competitions, double battles, and all of that. But in the story of a game, it takes away from the pace. Of course, there are other factors that similarly impact that, like the lack of voice acting, but allowing the games to evolve without burning the people who love that system is a win in my eyes. But yeah, that's all I'll say for the battle system, as most reviewers seem to especially focus on this element for good reason. And this is not a review, it is a somewhat scripted ramble, which is why my tone sounds completely different today, because I am not trained in reading off a script. Other elements of ZA that I like is the world itself, which is admittedly a crazy take considering the graphics, the limited interiors, the flat balconies, and so on. However, as a person who is often overwhelmed by the depths and magnitude of open worlds, such as Breath of the Wild, Witcher 3, and don't get me wrong, these are some of my favorite games of all time, this literal major flaw, for most, is great for me. And you could argue that is copian. I enjoy the actual vibe of the city, and I hate cities, so that is a crazy take as well. Even with all the devious mons that await to attack you, it would be nice if areas of the city were more distinct, that is very true. But I am a simple man and enjoy the world that was given to us. I've especially enjoyed the mechanic of wild zones. This is great in several capacities to me. The first is essentially the elimination of surprise encounters, where in past games you get jumped and pulled into a battle and a bunch of menus. Now you can run away, which is just absolute quality of life for me. Secondly, slowly unlocking more and more areas throughout the game is refreshing, especially it allows the overall world to change a little bit, which is pleasant. Thirdly, I just really like the checklist each zone gives you. It's satisfying to complete in a much more integrative way of finding certain specific mons. One of the biggest appeals of the game is the return of Megas in new forms, and as someone who never had the chance to play the original X and Y games, this was a gimmick that I'd wanted to see for the years I've been involved in the franchise. The art style itself of new mechas has been quite polarizing. From what I've seen online, I really like the goofy designs, as they are whimsical and very chill in my eyes. Discovering all these new forms throughout the game is one of the biggest incentives, and it is well worth encountering these beasts. As always, the literal composition of Pokemon music is stellar, and one of the best parts of playing any of these titles. So overall, I've only touched on a few things, but I've just really enjoyed the game. It's quite addictive, really, and feels like a step forward. But is it really worth getting? Well, that is an entirely question that you must answer yourself. I'm not taking any obligation there. This is a ramble. There is a lot of validity that the game is horrendously priced, as well as the audacity of announcing the frickin' DLC before the game had even released. And all those fun consumerism things. For the sake of not ranting about capitalism, I will say, yeah, this is egregious in pricing and is a concerning problem around supporting games that have rising prices up to a new extremity. There are also the limits of the game, which might not be sufficient for you to see it as worthwhile, which is completely valid. Which leads us to the very problem of Pokemon as a whole, which in my eyes is the focus on everything else but the games. The games almost just seem to serve as a mood board for the empire of the franchise, as they work to release TCG, merch, anime, the all works. So from my limited understanding, there is not enough budget, time, or risks put into the games, because they are just a part of the world that must spin on for the biggest franchise in the world. Despite this all, I do genuinely love what I've encountered, with ZA being about 13 hours in, but I cannot deny these issues, and honestly, a lot of the copium I've had playing these games over the last few years is the idea of Pokemon itself. Which is invigorating. A world filled with these creatures, lore, there's so much potential, and so many ways to use this world in creative manners. Fans certainly have. There is a genuine reason this is the biggest franchise in the world as of 2025. Unfortunately, we have seen the dark side of this all with Pokemon's treatment of games that come close to them in the whole pocket monster element. Power Worlds is the obvious example, an innovative take on ideas that Pokemon have repeated for way too long. When there's seemingly no one that can compete with the behemoth that is this franchise, will Pokemon actually ever innovate further? I think Legends as a series has been the most promising sign, but maybe it's still not enough, and there are more and more reasons not to support any of this. It is a nuanced topic that I cannot feign wisdom. That is for you to find. I personally do plan to continue with the world of Pokemon. I find the escapism well needed in the world that we live in. Let me know your thoughts below. Subscribe for more.